problem. We can even share the recording as we continue. Okay, then. So Nikita, we're set to go.
Great. So welcome everyone to our fourth session on the Study Abroad series. This is going to be our second to last session. We are going to be taken through the experience of transitioning from Kenya to the US by Dr. Rhythm. My co-host is Tejal. Tejal is a 6th-year medical student at UN, and I am a 5th-year medical student at UN. Welcome everyone. Feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. If you feel like interacting directly with Dr. Rhythm, raise your hand. I hope everyone knows how to raise their hand on Zoom, and then you will be asked to unmute by one of the co-hosts, and you can ask your questions. We'll have a short introductory session, then we'll have the plenary session by Dr. Rhythm, and finally we'll have a Q&A session, and then a vote of thanks, and then we can call our fourth session to one end. So I'll invite my co-host Tejal to take
Thank
over.
you, Nikita. So I'd like to invite you all to this fourth session of the Study Abroad series. Today we have Dr. Rhythm Vasudeva, who is an alumni of our university. He completed MDCHB in 2014 and later worked at an emergency department for a year before doing a master's in science, degree in clinical research at Boston University, and even had an opportunity to do his research practicum at Brigham and Women's Hospital, which is a Harvard affiliated hospital. And then currently he's doing his residency in combined internal medicine and pediatrics at the University of Kansas in Wichita, as he is doing his research as well. So I'd like to welcome Doc and also wish you a happy Independence Day. I'm sorry we took time of your holiday, but we're so grateful to have you here.
Hey, yeah, thank you for that. It is July 4th, so I didn't know how big July 4th here was until my first year here, and everyone was like fireworks day, you know, so it is a pretty big deal here, and everyone just is laid back and like no one wants to work. So thank you for the introduction, Tejal. Should I kind of go ahead and start ahead with my presentation? Is that okay now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I think Tejal reached out to me asking about, sorry, I'm getting feedback in someone's, okay, that's better, sorry. So Tejal reached out asking about like, you know, coming to the US and the process and everything. And I'm really glad you've organized for such a thing, because when I was applying for this, I really had no idea. I just knew of one or two people who were pursuing this path. So really had to make long checklists and like, you know, just try and figure out the process. So I'll tell you what worked for me. A few things have changed since then, especially since COVID has hit. So I will try and touch on to that, but you may also need to do a little bit of more research on your own as well. So I'll show you what I have and some of the resources that I use myself too. So I think the first question really is, you know, asking yourself if you're interested in the US, why the US in specific? Because when I was applying, I looked into a lot of options, including the UK, Australia, South Africa, and I think you're covering that in your series, which I think gives you a lot of information. For me, the biggest push towards the US was these options for like several residencies that I can direct enter right out of medical school, really just clearing your exams and entering a system where I can start my residency, and then a clear path towards a fellowship, which I feel those lines were a little blurred with the other places, but they have their own strengths too. And then the other push for me towards the US was just how exhaustive like research is in the US, and the opportunities that you get here and how much you can kind of engage with PIs and just kind of the people you interact with in conferences. I think about like 60% of them happen like within the States. So just some random stats. So I think we all have some people have family in the US. So just some people are lucky to get a green card. So there are like a lot of reasons where you may want to consider the US. And I think the reason should be strong because you'll be shifting your entire life, your entire practice. You'll have to adapt to a completely new system. So I really, really insist that your reason should be strong enough because it will require a lot of motivation to go through this process because it is quite challenging and draining at some points. So I'm just kind of touching on the agenda. I'm going to discuss the process of like applying to the US and how that works, and then studying for the USMLEs themselves. Then a little bit about the residency kind of process as well, like in starting off residency, what are the pros and cons of some visa options, and life in residency really, and then just a quick summary. So the process. This is like a general layout of the process, and it's very close to what I had like kind of checklisted when I made my like kind of to-do list when I was applying. So the first and the foremost thing is going to be to register with ECFMG and get your unique ID number. And this ECFMG number, or also called your USMLE ID number, is going to stay with you for like the rest of your application process. In fact, the rest of your life. And then once you kind of register, you're going to get a few documents that need to be sent back so that they can attest and verify you. And these need to be attested by your dean's office. And just as I mentioned that, there's something called an MSPE, which I'll get into later. When you're applying for residency, one of the documents that's required is an MSPE, which also comes through the dean's office. So those are like the couple of things that you will need to involve the dean's office for. And I encourage you to do it early because it can be quite, it can take some time. So once you do that and you have all your documents sorted and you get your ECFMG unique number, you'll need to book your exam through IWA, which is basically like an interactive web application. It's part of ECFMG's software. And through these, you'll book your exams, your step 1 and step 2s. So you choose an eligibility period. So I think this is where USMLEs are a little different from PLABs and the other exams. You pick like 3 months between which you want to do your exam. So you'll say between August and November 2021, I want to set my exam, and you pay for that. And then you go through a Prometric Center's website and you decide on the exact date. So on average, there are about 2 to 3 days a week where you can set the exam based on the availability. So you basically just choose the day that you're available. There's no one set date that you have to sit your exam. It's a little more flexible and you can choose your own time. So the same process applies for your step 1 and your step 2 CK, which is your clinical knowledge. Now, the step 2 CS, which is a clinical skills exam, or the OSCEs, so to speak, were initially there, but after COVID hit, they couldn't have in-person things, and they took it out completely, and they're continuing with it so far, unless it changes again in the future. So to replace that, they have kind of asked you to sit an occupational English test, kind of like IELTS for PLABs, but not, it's a little different, but it still covers the same domains of like English skills. And I think it should be pretty straightforward. And it just says like you need to have like passed, it doesn't specify by how much grade or everything. So I would look a little bit more into that. And that's the part I was saying, I don't know too much information about, but from what I read, it seems like you just need to like clear the exam. So it should be pretty straightforward. So once kind of you have all these things in place and you get your ECFMG certificate, now it's like for you to start applying for residency. And that's what takes me here to like the residency season beginning in the August and September months of every year. And really mostly it's like mid-September that applications go through, and like end August is when the applications open. So the application season runs between September and March every year. So once you apply in September, all the applications go through to all the programs that you've applied, and then you start getting interviews during the process, during the next few months. Then over the next few months, you kind of gauge, you interview, you gauge where you want to go. And then in March of the following year is when you rank these programs based on your preference. Like I ranked the University of Kansas top because I liked the program, and there are actually a bunch of Kenyans here too. So I feel like the transition for me would be easier. So based on your preferences, you rank your program. And a lot of people will say, rank on where you think you'll match. But really, if you look at like all websites and all official recommendations, they say you should rank it based on where you want to go. So that's what I would recommend, because all the other kind of advice and opinions are just opinions. So we don't really know if it holds. So you use your token number, which is and to get into the application season, you need to apply through ERAS, which is an electronic residency application system. And then they give you like a token number, which is what you'll use through your entire match season. And then the organization that conducts the matching process in March is called NRMP. And that's what you use to enter the match. So if you don't enter the match, then like you won't match into residency. And once you rank a program and you match, like you're kind of held responsible to start residency with that program. You're bound by a contract. So if you don't start residency after matching into a program, that can show badly on your system, and you can be banned by NRMP for the next year, or for however length they choose you to. So it's kind of like a big deal to rank and be sure whether, if you match, you want to make sure that you go to that place. Because a lot of places in the US can be scattered, and you may not be sure. So you want to be sure about the places that you rank. After that, after the rank, you basically you get applications for your residency, and all your documents need to be sorted. Your visa documents come in, and then you start residency on July 1st. Like that's standard across the country. And all this is kind of ACGME accredited. And that's one of the things you want to make sure in like your residency application, that the residency program is an accredited program. So that's kind of like an outline of how the application for residency works. And I thought of just hitting that right up front, because that's really what I think we all want to know. And this is like an example of a timeline very close to what I did, but in no ways this is like the only way to do it. There are tons of ways to do it. So you could, like in August last year, if you wanted to apply this year, 2021 September, for a match, so that you start residency on July 1st, 2022, this is how you should have gone about it at the least. Or you could have started way earlier as well. So you apply to ECFMG, send your documents. I added some extra things like planning away rotations, scheduling your OET, the English proficiency test. And then you kind of like, you can work on your CV and your research in the meanwhile. But by March latest, you want to have sat your step 1 and scheduled your step 2. And by June latest, you want to have sat your step 2, so that by the time you apply for your residency, you have your step 1 scores ready, your step 2 scores ready, and your OET ready. So basically you have your ECFMG certificate in hand prior to your residency application. So that's a very important part that I feel like my ECFMG, I took my CS in like June, July, and my results came in August. So August, actually mid-September. So it delayed my application process. And I think that affected the number of interviews I got as well. So I think it's an important part of like the application process, making sure all your documents are in check before you start applying. As a US citizen, you can do whatever you want. Like you just need to sit step 1. That's the only requirement. But I think as an IMG, it becomes important to make sure your other documents are in place. ECFMG is going to be like your biggest resource. So they have like for 2021, they have like, they release information booklets for every year. And like you can see here, they have like a 50-page information booklet about every single process of like what's involved, what documents need to be done, basically every single step, including the OETs, the English proficiency test, everything is on there. And if anything changes, any updates, the ECFMD kind of updates it on the website so that you're fully aware. And you can just register, they'll send you emails and everything about it. And if you eventually match in what we call the J1 visa, ECFMG is your sponsor. So they're really like your go-to. They're basically the board, the medical board, so to speak, for international grads at the first level. And then there are like state boards as well. So it's called the Education Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. And they have fact sheets and information booklets that are very useful. Just generally, I try to compile like a list of the most important documents that I could remember. So MSPE, the reason I mentioned this first is because it's easily forgotten. Like a lot of my colleagues who were applying, they were already in the US and they had to like try and get back in touch with the dean, try and arrange for this MSPE. I just found like a template MSPE online. And before I left the US, I knew this was a requirement. So I just went to Florence and like just make sure I had everything stamped and I took it with me. So I was able to help a couple of my colleagues and have theirs done too. But I just kind of like created my own and sent a template. And then obviously they verified, changed a lot of things, and then like, you know, and stamped it and gave it to me. And then a letter of recommendations are very going to be important documents. You do need your transcripts and degrees that will need to be uploaded. The ECFMD certificate, and then there are specific documents for your visa as well. Like if you're applying for a J1 visa, you'll need a statement of need from the Ministry of Health. And then I had to do mine from India because I'm an Indian citizen. And they will, based on that, they'll issue a DS 2019, which is a basis for your J1 visa. So you will need all these documents like for the rest of like your stay in the US. And then there'll be a bunch of residency paperwork once you match. So what are the tips for like a strong application? You need to have great scores, and I know this year step 1 is not going to be it's going to be pass or fail from next year onwards. So Jan 2022 onwards, step 1 is going to be a pass and fail. So what that means is that the focus may shift towards, you know, like your step 2 scores. So you probably need higher scores. People are going to start averaging better there. And the other thing that might happen is they might start paying attention to, you know, recommendation letters that come in, basically other things on your CV, where you did your med school. So all these things will start mattering a little more, in my opinion, but I could be wrong. So apart from that, you know, your letter of recommendations need to be pretty strong, like using strong, heavy words, like this is the best student we've had, like, you know, people here love to see that. And preferably if you do like away rotations in the US from US clinicians, that's going to help you a lot. So when I talk about away rotations, they're kind of like 3 tiers of like clinical experience in the US. The most kind of profound and the most impactful is what we call a USCE, or a US clinical experience. It's usually done during medical school, probably your 3rd or your 4th year. And you'd require step 1 results for it. So you need to have sat your step 1 during med school, which is possible. If you have graduated, there are some ways to organize externships. So I was not successful. And then the last kind of option is observerships, which is what I did. I did like 2 observerships while I was in the US doing my master's in clinical research. So that's kind of like your guide to, you know, if you can arrange for like a USCE during med school, that's like your best bet. And then try and do research work, you know, publish abstracts, do presentations, apply to like, you know, like if you're interested in cardiology, like to the AHA, ACC. So like all these things come in. So the more you do it in the US, the kind of more impact it's likely to have on your application, though any experience is good experience. And like in my interview, we talked a lot about like the research I had done. So I know it helps. It may not get you in, but it may help you stand out from other people. Then again, like ECFMG certification prior to your application season, and please ensure that you have a complete application, because if you don't, then it just doesn't go through. So I know I'm kind of going slow, but I think those were important details. Starting for the USMLE, so we have 3 steps. So step 1 is a 1-day exam, 8-hour long. And you have 7 60-minute blocks with like a 1-hour break overall. So if they're like, they tend to have like these pre-trainings, like 15 minutes, kind of helping you use the software. If you can do that at home, you get your full 60-minute break. And then you self-allocate the break across the day. So you can take 10 minutes after your first block, 10 after your second, and such. And that's how all the steps are. And this is just the general idea of like, you know, how they structure their exam. And you can see a lot of it like pathology, physiology, pharmaco. Like basically your, like your first, second, and third years. And then they also tend to have a bit of like biostats and epidemiology, which is something that you get encountered in like probably third and fourth year. I'm not sure how the 6-year system works, but hopefully by like fourth year, you're in a good position to sit this exam. Studying resources, there are tons, they're like at least 100. I think USMLEs are the most exhausted resources for any exams out there. So if once you start hunting and once you're sure you want to do USMLEs, just shoot a text or whatever, like get in touch with me, or just Google USMLE resources and you'll find a bunch. In the last 2-3 months, like your optimal resources are going to be like your UWorld and your First Aid. I highly recommend like getting a UWorld subscription and not just getting, those like screenshots of what people have done in the past. Because once you do your own, you can see where your weaknesses are and you can gauge what to focus on. So I had a UWorld subscription and it helped me tons. And get your own First Aid, and whatever you pick on UWorld kind of annotated on First Aid. So at like your last week, all you're doing is like flipping through your First Aid. Then the other resources like Pathoma, and I kind of bold in Amboss because a lot of US medical students use Amboss and they love it. And that's something new that I didn't have when I was there. And like I said, there are a bunch of other resources. You want to do practice tests before setting your exam. So the UWorld has its own self-assessment. It's called UWSA, and NBMEs are kind of like the standard provision from like, it's like a national board kind of mock exam. We don't need to get into this. So step 2 CK is clinical knowledge. So it kind of just tests your 4th, 5th, 6th years, like or your internal medicine peds and all of that. So past your basic sciences. And this is 1 hour longer and the same amount of break. And we don't have a clinical skills exam, which I'll get into a bit. And like you can see, medicine is the heaviest portion, 50-60%. Then you have surg, peds, obs, gyn, and psychiatry. And this also like system-based, so you can look into that as well. Resources here, I personally use the UWorld again with Step Up to Step 2 CK. A lot of people still use First Aid. I use a lot of my Step 1 First Aid, the annotated versions, because you like to, if you form like a mental pathway in your mind and like flow sheets in your mind, so you want to go back and just kind of like consolidate that. A lot of people use Master the Boards. Board and Beyond is a very famous resource as well. So CS, there is no exam currently, but they kind of still need to assess your communication and your clinical skills. So you need to get a satisfactory score. That's what they mentioned. So I don't know what that means, but I'm sure they have more resources like when you go to their website. So the occupational English test is what they need. By December of the application year. So you want to make sure that you sit it early and get done with it so that it doesn't interfere with your matching process. And then you need to like qualify under one of these pathways. So like if you're already licensed, that's great. And then if your school is accredited in a World Federation for Medical Education, which UN is, I'm pretty sure they are, but you should always verify every year just to make sure that they've not lost their accreditation. So either as a student or as an alumni, you should be able to qualify for this CS pathway. So step 3 is something that you can take either before or after your residency, and it's a separate board. It's not necessarily through ECFMG or OASIS anymore. It's through FSMB, which is like a federation state something. It's a 2-day exam now, and day one and day 2.5 is like mostly MCQs, and the second half of day 2 is what they call CCS, or like a clinical simulations case. And this is what it looks like. Oh, sorry, I thought I had a slide on it, but it just kind of like it shows you like a patient comes in with this and this. So you actively, it's like a medical record, like an electronic medical record system. So you're putting in orders, and then something happens to the patient and like how you respond to it. So it's kind of like all a simulation of a real case scenario. I don't know if you guys have played this game called Prognosis on Apple on App Store. It's kind of like that. You order a test, you see what the test comes back as. It's very interactive. So resources for this, again, UWorld, that's going to be your biggest, and the UWorld with a CCS subscription is what you need. And I use Master the Boards for this one. And then there's still Step Up, there's still Boards and Beyond, there's still Amboss, and then the same practice tests. And there is like a trial test with the CCS software on the USMLE's website. One thing I want to mention here, just look at the proportion of like the biostats and epidemiology here. It's like 13%. So that will be a huge portion of your exam when you're like preparing for step 3, which is like 3 years ahead, like for you, but just saying. I just thought of bringing these stats out because I know a lot of you may have questions about like, you know, how, what are the match rates? Is it really worth it? And I really dug into this before going in, and, you know, I'm going to show you the stats and then share my personal experience. So, so this is kind of like the match rates for IMGs by specialty, right? And a lot of you just kind of want to know this, is it worth it? So like I'm doing internal medicine peds. So like if you're a US IMG, which we're not, so we're non-US IMG, so we're looking at the greens, it's like 18%, so pretty low. So I had applied for internal medicine and internal medicine in peds. So you can kind of see like ranging around 50% for internal medicine, which is really good compared to some of the other like neurological surgery, which is like 31%. Orthopedics is really low, which is like 15%. So plastic surgery is like 19%. But if you look at like other medicine specialties, like emergency med is 41, and like radiology is actually higher too. Dermatology is reasonable. But if you look into the surgical fields, like gen surg is 26, it starts to get lower. Obs-GYN is reasonable, like 33%. But I think orthopedics and gen surg tend to have like lower match rates, and you need and that doesn't mean you won't match. It just means you need better credentials, and which is what we'll get into, right? So if you can see like the average step 1 score for a matched non-US IMD was 234, and for an unmatched was 220. So, and then the mean step 2 score is 240, and I'm thinking this will go even higher once step 1 becomes pass fail. So just kind of, this is a general idea, and you can get it off online as well through the NRMP website, and that's just more specific stats for each specialty. Just to briefly mention, like J1 and H1B visa, these are 2 options you'll have if you don't have a green card or citizenship. So if you're in a J1 visa, it's most programs are sponsored, and that's more like 90% of programs sponsor J1 visas. And the requirements come through the Ministry of Health, where you'll need a statement of need, and they have a return to home condition for 2 years. After completing your residency, unless you match into fellowship and you extend your visa, and then you go back to home after those years. But there's a way out of it where you work in an area of need in the US for 3 years, and they kind of excuse the return to home condition in that scenario. So the J1 visa is usually renewed every year, like on annual basis. So they give you a DS 2019, which is valid for a year, and if you leave the country after a year, you need to get your visa reissued through an embassy. The reason I mention that is because it's hard to get, because as a resident, you only get like 1 or 2 weeks off at the max, and sometimes embassy delay, especially like in COVID time. So I've not been able to travel home for like 2 years now, and that's just something, and I don't plan to travel now because I don't want to risk it at all, because just in 1%, if it doesn't get renewed, then your residency gets halted. So just some pros and cons there. And it is easier to match into fellowship from here, say, like if you're on a J1 visa, because 95% of programs like sponsor J1 on a fellowship as well. Now for an H1B, the limited programs, and you're eligible for H1B in some programs if you complete step 3 before the match day, and there is no area of need requirement. So basically, if you finish your residency, you can go and work wherever you want. So my experience, just in very brief terms, like I feel like the system here is very functional. It's standardized, and everyone kind of knows what to do, what's expected. You have boards and resources to go to. If you're facing issues, you have people to reach out to. So it's a lot of resources and support available as needed. You start earning in residency, so you don't need to like pay any fee, because like I know UN requires that, Aga Khan requires that. So there's nothing of that sort. How much you earn varies per state, because each state has different taxes, and like the pay range is different, and like the living expenses are different. So all that really just depends on where you match, but it ranges between like 45 to I would say like 52 to like $65,000 per annum. That's kind of the average pay for during residency. And there's a lot of research and growth opportunities. All like most conferences are here, so you can like apply just as long as you're on top of it. Again, a lot of support available and diversity. Like I've seen people from like all parts of the world, and it's been a great experience. Challenges, we come from a system that's very paper-based, and now here everything is like electronic and like medical records. So you have to chart online, you have to put orders online, like on an intranet. It's very like you just get surprised because there are orders for things like, you know, like checking blood pressures, and which you don't expect considering like back home, like, you know, you just tell the nurse, but you, as if there's no order here, it won't be done. So there's just a lot of getting around and understanding how the system works. And there's a lot of like discharge, like disposition plans, the understanding like the healthcare infrastructure. Took me a few months here, but it is possible. And most programs understand that's a limitation with IMGs, and they provide support for you to understand that. And understanding insurance and all, and billing, that's a huge part of like the US healthcare system that people learn over years. So it's overwhelming initially, but it does get better. And obviously you need to plan ahead. Like before I matched into residency, I was asked, you know, when do I want my holiday? So you need to like plan way in advance, and that's just something I wasn't used to. And a lot of people like tend to feel a little culturally aware and just they're not sure how much to be themselves. But over time, hopefully you'll find friends and colleagues you can kind of feel more comfortable with. And language, you know, like the accents are different, just kind of getting used to the pace and just everything, you know, it's just something that some people may have challenges with. These are some resources that that I think will be helpful as you navigate like application for residency and beyond. One thing, a lot of things that I've already said, and I have a colleague here with me who makes YouTube videos. He's a second year internal medicine resident now. He's called Dr. Chala, and he has some great videos for IMG oriented like people who are applying. So I highly recommend his channel. And he only started last year. So before that, I followed Doc Osera just to get some guideline on how to study and all that stuff. And a lot of you may have heard about Dr. Najib. And I also like Armando Hassan Dungan, like his lectures. So just a few resources that I used and I think would be useful for you. So just basically, you know, decide early because if you do want to come to the US, you want to get all these things in order from the beginning. The sooner you start, the better. You want good scores. I recommend setting your step one, getting it out of the way as soon as you can while things are fresh, because once you go out and you're like 5 years out, like how I was, it's really hard to get yourself to read BChem again. But those are just like some things. And then you want strong letters of recommendation. You want to have like a valid visa status to decide H-1B versus J-1. Be thorough and super accurate with your documentation, because if on your application, if anything is inaccurate, that's like a big deal and there'll be like a red flag and you may not be able to enter the match again. And then stay updated. Yep. I think that's it. Yeah, I think we can, I'm open to questions or whatever everyone has to say now.
All right. Thank you, Doc, for the wonderful talk. We now know part of the steps. So many of these things I didn't know, especially about the MSPEs. And now we know. So we hop on to questions. We have a few questions. So Nikita and I will be covering them, a few each. So I'm going to start us off. So Maureen asks, does one pay for USMLE? Yes, I know that you pay for them, but maybe Doc can tell us how much it was.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, one huge part of like this process is going to be figuring out the fees, right? So step one is, I think it ranges between $800 to $900 per exam. So step two CS used to be the most expensive, like $1,250. But the others kind of range between the 800 to 1,000 mark, like depending on the year, but mostly it stays within that range. So that'll be step one, step two, CK, and step three.
Okay, and then there's Benon, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. She asks, Dr. Rhythm, do you think it is advisable for someone to do step one while it still has the 3-digit scoring, even when you'll apply to match in a year when most other applicants will have the pass or the fail score?
Yeah, and like I tried to touch on that, but it's just a difficult discussion, right? Like no one knows really. So we don't know how residency programs are going to start looking at applications once this pass and fail starts. And the only way to know if you're in as a residency coordinator, and I mean, or maybe if like you're a chief, and I'm not even in that year yet. So I don't want to say things and like, which make you believe something, but we can always speculate. Like, I mean, I'm just thinking if I'm a program director, like, and there's no pass or fail. I mean, if there's only a pass or fail, I'll tend to look at these other factors that matter. And if there is someone else who has a step one score that's great, like that's a 260, then I'll be like, oh, like I know this guy is like good. So but it could work the other way, like, so if your step one score is just a bare pass, like a 205, then maybe pass or fail is a better bet. So I think that the answer to the question is that it just depends on the individual. Like I feel like I could have done better with scoring in step one and showing people in the US that where I'm coming from, like it doesn't affect how I score on step one. So I think for IMGs, it's like it used to be like a proving point, like, or at least to bring us to like a comparison level. But that said, I guess that will just change to step two now. So it's a tough question to answer. Yeah.
Okay, and is there an advantage before starting the steps? Is internship an advantage after graduating before starting the steps? And what can we do while you're still in undergrad to keep yourself more competitive?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, so I don't know. So I think internship and like my experience in the ER at Aga Khan, like I think they were helpful for like a CK kind of approach to exams. But I personally think the sooner you do it, like the closer you are to the basic sciences, the easier it's going to be, because it was very hard for me to like read BChem again. And I kid you not, like it was just a thing that I just couldn't get my head around. But I had to do it, and you do it. And then I just have a feeling if you're in med school and you're in that mindset, that you're probably gonna feel more at ease. And then as you progress, then then you'll feel more comfortable sitting your step two as well. And I think what that does is also pushes you to do better in med school. I feel like I remember when I was in med school, the tendency tends to become, oh, like we just see, did we get a 50? Did we pass? Like, and I think this keeps pushing you to do better. And I think that's a great motivation during med school as well. And like I mentioned earlier, if you sit your step one during med school, you can go for these USCEs, which is going to be a great advantage for your CV. And what can you do as an undergrad to be more competitive? Like, try and get, like, for me, the biggest factor, most programs that I was applying to were asking for USCs. So I think that's the biggest thing you can add to your CV as a medical student. And the only way you can do a good USCE is by sitting your step one. But there are some places that you can go without doing your step one. And if you follow Dr. Chala's videos, he has one whole video on this, and he explains which programs allow you to do it without your step one. So I think those resources are online and available. The other thing you can do is, presentations. It might be hard to get a full publication in undergrad, but at least abstracts and presentations. I know there's some local ones that AMSUN also organizes. So those are great, and I think they're helpful. Yeah.
All right. And what is annotated, the first aid that you said about, and is it possible to schedule a credibility period without the NSPEs? I don't know if there's a change in the system. So this is a question from Benjamin, and he's asking, are there any channels that Kenyan students can get to the US, LORs, considering the cost of the UWorld subscription? They're usually so expensive.
Okay, yeah, great specific question. So what I meant by annotated first aid is annotate the first aid yourself. So, like you're going to have your copy of first aid. I had it on my iPad. So I had like an Apple Pencil with it. So whatever I would read on like UWorld and it was related to the topic on the first aid, I would just write it down on my like digital copy, and then have that digital copy like sync across also when I'm like sitting in the bus or whatever. I can read it anytime. And that's And you really need to build a system that works for you. I had friends who work well with hard copies. So they would have sticky notes or whatever, keep adding it onto your first state. So your first is going to kind of be like your Bible for your step one. And that's something you're going to be reading the last 1-2 weeks intensely, just making sure you know it cover to cover, have your like key highlights of like topics that you struggle with, and you kind of review those like on like spaced repetition basis. So that's what I mean by annotated first aid. You're not going to find an annotated version. That would be great, right, for all of us. But yeah, is it possible to schedule credibility? I'm thinking you meant eligibility period, because I didn't think I mentioned a credibility period. So the eligibility period is the MSP is something you only need for residency application. So when you're applying through ERAS, it's when you've finished everything, you've finished your steps. So you will be able to schedule your exams without getting MSPEs. The MSPEs is something for later. And I'm sorry I mentioned it at the beginning of the kind of process, but it's not something you need at the beginning. But it is something you need through the dean's office. Are there any channels that Kenyans can use to get US LORs? You need to be in the US to get an LOR. So the only way to get a US LOR is to do an observership or to do a USCE. And I was fortunate enough, like when I was doing my master's, I got in touch with a cardiologist and I shadowed him. So, if you visit the US and, you find a way to shadow someone, that might be a way if you're not able to get a USCE. But the only way to get a true US LOR is by working with someone in the US. And, it could be like a research project too. Like some people, it's not going to be the best letter, but at least it's a US letter, and it can be like one letter that you can use. I think you can upload up to 5 letters. And if one of them is like a research letter, I think that's totally fine. Like I had my research program director upload a letter too. So those are some of the ways where you can like try and get a US LOR. Best time to subscribe for a UWorld subscription. The cost is expensive, but definitely worth it. So it's like $350 for 3 months from what I remember. And I got a 3-month subscription. And for my step 3, I had to extend it once because things happened and COVID happened and I couldn't set it. So I have been doing 3 monthly, and most people do 6 monthly, and I recommend 6 monthly because in 3 months, you're trying to be quick with getting through UWorld, and you may not have a chance to do a second run. Again, like I studied in a different way, and I only went through UWorld once, but a lot of people go through UWorld at least twice. And if you see Dr. Chala's videos as well, like he recommends going through it at least twice. And I think a 6 months of subscription to be good. So initially you kind of start off, just understanding concepts. And then towards the end, the last 3 months, it's more dedicated towards like preparation. So I would recommend the 6 month, 3 to 6 month, but 3 month if you're like sure, and 6 month if like you're starting off and you're not sure.
Okay, and Aditi asks to elaborate on the MSPE. She says she's gathered it's almost like a letter of recommendation, but from the school. You mentioned that you had to give them a template that they modified. So what exactly is that about?
Yeah, so I'm just pretty like very controlling of like what goes on the application. So I don't know what they would have done like without me, because I don't know what experience they've had with people applying to the US. And turns out they do. So credit to them. So if you go to the dean's office and tell them to prepare an MSPE for you, they should. But you'll have to follow up very closely. But if you feel like I just found a random template. I just Googled it, like how should an MSPE look like? And then I think I found an official website that gave recommendations, and I just created one for me based on what I did in med school. And then I sent it to them. And then they kind of like edited it based on, just changing language. Like I use language like, like he's a great student. And like, okay, like he's a good student. So stuff like that, like minor changes, So it is like it's not a letter of recommendation in the sense that like it's an LOR, but it's it's a short summary of your stay in medical school to show like how you performed in like the courses I wanted to take in and what kind of extracurricular stuff you did. So it's like a summary of you as a medical student, how you performed. Yeah, I don't know if that helps, but it should be straightforward. It's not a big deal. And if people want, I guess I could share like a template, but Florence knows, and maybe she even uses my template now. Who knows? I don't even know if it's Florence anymore. Sorry, it's been so long. Is it still Florence? Is the
Yeah.
Florence like the dean's assistant? Okay, fine. Anyway, so
Okay,
the dean, yeah, the dean secretary
Yeah.
is someone who'll do it. Yeah.
okay, I'll now hand over to Nikita, who'll go through the next questions.
All right. So Dr. Rhythm, a template would actually be quite helpful.
Yeah,
I knew
sure.
how we got into that culture in second year with BK on templates. So we have a question where Shajan is saying that she recently heard rumors that programs will only be matching fresh graduates, less than 3 years of YOG. How true or false is this?
Yeah, good question again. So that's a great question for alumni, right? Like, how far out should you apply? The simple answer is like the sooner the better, right? Like the further you are from med school graduation date, the more explanation you have to do. There's nothing like only matching, at least not that I'm aware of, unless you have a credible source. But if it's just hearsay, then I wouldn't trust it too much. We have a lot of people in our program currently who are like 5-6 years post graduation and still matched. So it is possible to match the further out you are from residency. Like I graduated in 2014 and I started residency in 2019, so 5 years. So I don't know how accurate this 3-year kind of cap is, but it is true. The longer you are out of med school, the harder it's going to be. And you need solid reasons for what you were doing in that gap period. So like for me, it was, internship, then a year in A&E, and then 2 years of research course. So my 4 years were well covered. So I didn't struggle with that explanation. But a lot of people do, because they're just trying to figure out. So as long as you're showing you're moving towards a US goal, I think a lot of programs will be okay with it. But again, like beyond 5 years, like when I was applying, the kind of cap was 5 years, so I felt safe. But beyond 5 years, it does get pretty hard. Yeah.
All right. So Ilhan asks, how does racism affect the Black doctors in getting integrated into the systems? Do they still experience microaggression and racism while working and also off hours? If so, to what extent? Does it affect their performance as doctors? Tell us about racism.
Yeah, I mean, like the place where you're going to feel the least racism is at home, right? Like you're not, and it is, and people see you're different, and that's going to be a thing. And people, and just naturally, you don't trust something that's different. So there's always some hesitancy to is like trusting, where you come from. And I think as coming in as IMG, there's a lot of like assuring or like creating, and then like a reputation that you're trustworthy. And I think it needs to be built, and more so with an IMG, because they have no idea what kind of med school you've come from. They have zero idea what kind of medical training you have. They know you struggle with EMR, so they don't even know how well you follow the orders. So there is a huge kind of hesitancy, I would say. But that said, a lot of IMG doctors like have done very well, like for themselves. Like some of them are like the biggest PIs in some of the biggest trials in the country. So, like I did my research at the Harvard Hospital, so I saw IMG doctors like being PIs on great projects. So my point is that it could exist and you could face it. And I think it's really going to be on you to kind of prove that, that you're going to fit in and you're going to like adapt to the new system. Now, that aside, and just the blankly racism, like using your race as like a factor, I personally have not, maybe with some patients. So like some patients who like, who've grown up here and like have zero exposure, they may request for like another doc or something like that. Happens. But the great thing is that if your program is supportive of you, then they can like fire the patient. So we've had a lot of patients in the clinic who come in like, we don't want to be treated by this doc. And it's clear like there's no other reason apart from like being of a different race. And the program was very strong in saying, if you are staying in this clinic, you have to be seen by who we provide you, because this is a residency run clinic. So in the culture that you will experience, and you can't control what individual people think and feel, but at the end of the day, if you feel like you have a place to go to and like a system to fall back on, I think that helps. And I know our program, at least my program, and most programs in the US are supportive. I can't speak for other programs, so I hope wherever you match, they will kind of take that into consideration. On your orientation day, kind of they go through this process with you, and they tell you if you face this, what to do. And they have all these kind of like trainings. They have like hundreds of trainings, but one of them is on racism. So yeah, and of course it will affect their performance. Like it does affect, we've seen doctors go into depression, but it's about seeking support if and when you need it. But you're going to be so busy in residency. I just hope it's not big enough for you to like affect your day-to-day activity. And if you face it, then you have sources. And if you're in a program that kind of facilitates or doesn't encourage such behavior, you won't feel it, even if there is. Sorry, yeah, I struggle with sensitive topics, like you can see.
I get you. So you've especially broached the issue of racism in the workplace. What about outside the workplace, off work hours? What's that like for especially the Black doctors?
Yeah, I think I would speak more if I was Black, but like I think I'm also, I'm confused as a Mexican sometimes. It's like, it's hard. Like, so people don't even like know. And they're sometimes oblivious to, like who you are and where you come from. So if like you're Black, you may just feel like, you may just seem to them like a Black American doc, like not an IMG.
Yeah.
But as Blacks, like I've had friends, and they build their communities, and we have great friends. And like I said, individually in stores and something, you could see something. Yeah. And I can't deny to that. They're obviously, I remember when I was in Boston, I had like a Black friend, and he as a student, as an American, he felt like he was mistreated. So, you will experience such things if you're not, and maybe, and I think eventually it comes down to like how you respond to it, and what resources and what options you have if you do face it. Because it'll be unfair, it'll be very, very naive of me to say that, like there's no racism, and we all know there is, like hints of it at least.
Makes sense. So it seems as though you're telling us that having a sense of community, having a strong community to support you when
Yeah.
you're, in one of
Yeah,
those.
and I think honestly, I think this is the case everywhere. You have this like in Australia, in the UK. Like I don't, if you're moving out of your country, even in India, like if I was to go to India back, I wouldn't be treated as a local Indian. Like there's this, people don't like foreign things. It's just like a human nature to be hesitant and like reluctant to trust. So, and I think much of that, and the US does have a history, where it comes from. So the good thing though is that people are vocal here, and people fight for what they want and what they desire. So I think there's a lot of vocal like sense of like belonging here, where you may not find in other places.
That's good. So Maureen Waithera asks, do you apply to specific schools for residency, or is it a general application?
So it's kind of a bit of both, right? So when you apply in September through ERAS, that's the website you're going to be using to do your residency applications. So your entire application is one. So like you have like your application itself, like your details, your personal details, your research work, your all your other things on your CV, and then you have like your LORs. So everything goes on to ERAS. And then on ERAS, you find individual programs and then you assign them your application, you assign them your LORs, you assign them your thing. So everything goes on one system and then you kind of disperse it through that one system. So it's kind of a little both, but you do apply to specific schools in the sense, but through ERAS. And you'll see that when you go to individual websites, like if you Google University of Kansas and you come across a website, they will say we accept applications through ERAS. So ERAS is a coordinating organization.
It's kind of like the Joint Admissions Board when you're transitioning from 844 high school to university. Like we choose the schools, but then
I mean,
the board is still
I didn't
decides
do
where
the
you're
system
going.
though, so I wouldn't know. Sorry.
Okay.
I did the
All
IB, but I'm not sure. Yeah.
Joseph Mururi asked, could you comment on the sponsorship programs for other fields in medicine, like global medicine? I think he's asking about non-clinical branches of medicine.
Yeah, good question. So like kind of your options, like when I came out of med school and I made my US transition plan, a lot of people, like including some of like my colleagues from like above years and even my year, they went for like MPH programs. So if you do MPH programs, there's like the global health, epidemiology, biostats, whatever you name it, right? And that also goes through another central application process. But that so they do 2 years of that, and then while they're kind of doing their MPH, they prepare for residency application. So that's the general thing. And I didn't want to do public health. I wanted to do clinical research. So I found a program, MS in clinical research at BU, and that's what I undertook. Now, sponsorship programs, yes, there are, and that's very individual, and it's very based on the university program. Like I was able to get a little bit of scholarship or sponsorship for my program, but not all do. And some of them can even offer up to like 50-60% sponsorship. So it really depends on that program. And there are several like student loan opportunities that you can apply through. But the thing is, like all these are private, like, and all these loan options can be like pretty heavy to like pay back. They have like 10% interest rates and all. So again, like I don't know if cheaper, maybe you can find something locally as well. That's something I looked into, some local sponsors as well. So a lot of that will depend on the individual program. And I think these alternate fields of like paramedicine, so to speak, like global health, is also a great option. And my backup option was, if I didn't match into residency, I would do clinical research. So I think you should also think about what your backup plan is if you don't match, because that's always a possibility. And there's like a whole, I don't know how much you guys want to know about like what happens, like if like you're into one of these programs and what happens after that, because that's a whole process as well.
So if any of the more common scholarship programs come to mind, would you type them out on the chat box and people can look them up?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's no like scholarship programs. And like I mentioned, like if you're applying to BU per se, then you just have to ask, like when you're applying, ask like the program coordinator, do you have, I don't think there's anything national of sort. Like there are for like US citizens, like in US green card holders, but for IMGs, it's very, very individual and like it's at the university. So, I mean, it would be very hard for me to know each university and what they have. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. So kazi kwako, Joseph Mururi, you need to look them up yourself. So Steph Apondi asks, is the residency program fully sponsored once you match or are accepted, or is there a fee that you pay? Or I would pay, I'd like to add.
Yeah, so I think the question can be clearer in the sense that, are you asking, there's obviously fees around, like applying for your license, applying for the match, applying for each program you apply for has a fee to it in your residency. So the whole residency application can range between $2,000 to $3,000 based on how many programs you apply to. Or if you're very confident, as low as like $500. I applied to over 200 programs because I didn't want to take a chance. And I ended up paying close to $3,000 for my application, like residency application. But once you match and once you're accepted and once you start your residency, then you're paid, like, because you're the workforce. So they pay you, and they pay you like I mentioned, anywhere between 50 to 65, depending on which state you end up in. And so I think that's reasonable. Like, and you can probably fend for yourself and like maybe one kid, like, so it's enough for you to like sustain, and if you're like if you're like conscious, like I'm by myself, so it's great and I get to even save. But I know of like people with small families who've been okay. And the thing is, once you transition, like it's just 3 years, and once you become an attending, then your salary jumps from like 60 to like almost 3 to 4 times more. Um, so like eventually you catch up on all that you spend, and that's a big perk of the US. I think the pay in the US is probably the best out of all the regions.
Nice.
Cost of living.
And so,
is that the next question?
Yeah, that's the next question from both Samantha and Nikolai. Samantha asks, kindly comment on the cost of living, while Nikolai asks, how do you compare the residency pay compared to the cost of living? So
yeah, okay. So cost of living, again, depends where you match. And it's like when I was in Boston, it was awful because I shared a room with like 4 people in the apartment, and we like shared like 2 bathrooms. And it was like a pretty tight area. Like the elevator was like squashy, like everything was just very basic, and there was like nothing. And then that cost me like $12 to like $1,400 a month in Boston. Now, come Kansas, like in Wichita, I'm paying the same amount, and I'm living by the riverfront. I have like a swimming pool, a gym, like and everything, or like in-house, like washings, dryer, everything. And there are people here who stay in 2 bedrooms for like $600, $700 a month. So that's like what, like 1/6 of like what you're going to be earning. So I think it really depends where you go. And that's a big factor when you're applying for residency. If you want to go to an area that's more comfortable, you can have your own car. Like probably like having a car in Boston is also very expensive, because I remember as a student, my attendings would pay like $400 a month at BU to park. So, like just for the university, that's almost like rent for your car. So it's expensive. And so Boston is not the only place. Like Boston, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, these are like expensive regions. And it's just something how it is. But if you choose like Midwest, Southern areas, they tend to be cheaper, just in general. And pretty much like the education, I feel like the residency level, like the training is the same. Like there's a basic minimum that every resident needs to know through ACGME. So that's provided regardless of where you do your residency. So you always, no matter where you match, as long as it's ACGME accredited, you're getting like well-trained. I think that's one way to look at it.
$400 for parking a car is a lot.
Yeah, I know, right?
So, but you said, I was going to ask why then would people pick to go to non-Midwestern or Southern states if the cost of living is higher?
So preference, right? Like people could have family in these regions, that one, and then 2, they just like a busier lifestyle. Like I loved my life in Boston despite all the costs. Like I still wanted to match in Boston despite all of that, because I got used to that lifestyle. I got used to the kind of, the busyness and the hustle, and you're probably going to be walking everywhere, and you're probably going to be taking teas and like the tube. So that's not here. Over here, you take your car everywhere, even if it's like across the road. So it's just a different culture, and some people like that over this. And some names, if you want to match into like Mount Sinai, or if you match into like NYU or Boston or Harvard, so those are other reasons. Like if you don't want to come to, and some of those programs are like the higher rated overall, like it will, so it also depends where you want to like eventually work and eventually do your fellowship, because there tends to be a pattern of you end up doing fellowship in the region where you match for residency. So like if I want to do cardiology and I really wanted to be in Boston, then I would have hoped to match in Boston, but I didn't. So like for me, it's probably going to be easier to match into fellowship within the Midwest since I'm from here. But again, that's not like set in stone. There are exceptions, and there are enough exceptions for it not to be like a thing. But there's like a pattern that people notice. Yeah.
So now that you brought up the pace of life in the busier areas, the more expensive areas, Ilhan asks, how do your shifts look like? Are you overworked?
Again, so ACGME makes sure that all residents are like, the wellness is a huge part of it, right? And I'm going to say numbers which don't sound like wellness is like a priority, but it is. And and I personally think it used to be worse, and I think it's probably better than like Kenya in terms of like making sure hours are not crossed. So ACGMA has a hard cap on, you can't go beyond 80 hours a week. Now I know that sounds like a lot, like, because it's like the normal work week for anyone is like 40, right? So we're talking double the amount. But mind you, this is residency, and I know some residents in like UON, they would work at UON and then like go and work at like other private centers to try and fend for themselves. So they would work like, I think, over 120 hours a week. So the advantage here is that you're getting paid by a program enough for you not to do other things, to kind of seek like financial input. So 80 hours a week is a cap, but I usually, on average, I think I work between 50 to 60 a week. And then I do my research projects on top of it. So this is pure residency work, like excluding your private reading and like your other research stuff that you may be doing. This is like clinical residency work, yeah.
So there's a question on...
And that? Sorry.
Go back on. So there's a question on whether there's a need to do your USMLEs to pursue non-clinical areas such as health innovation.
Hello?
I think we've lost.
Sorry, I think I'm back. I don't know what happened there. Did
No,
we lose? Oh, we lose
I think
Nikita.
I think we've lost Nikita.
Okay.
But I can continue.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
I'm not sure the train that she had, but the next person was...
I think it was with a non-medical degree.
Oh yeah, so does one need to do USMLE to pursue the non-clinical areas? So if they're doing like innovation, public health, data science.
No, you don't need to do USMLEs. And that's how I got into MS in clinical research, and people get into MPH. And that's kind of, people use that as a transition plan. So like, you're going to take 2 years to like sit your exams and everything. So people just end up taking a course or like a public health course. And while they're doing that, they sit their USMLEs. So you only need your USMLEs for residency or a if you want to.
With regards to that, so does one get to practice after residency? Is it automatic, or does one have to apply to practice after?
So once you complete residency, you need to find a job, right? So if I stopped after residency and I chose to become like a hospitalist, I would look for a job in that kind of job description. And then once I get my job, to that state, I need to get the license for the state, and then I need to get the visa. It will be like a sponsored H-1B because I need to do my area of need first. So it will be the same process of like applying for a job and getting your license in the new state. But you are ECFMG certified, so that makes you eligible to apply and look for jobs.
So you can just apply for jobs, but you don't really have like a definite job set out for you, right?
No, yeah, good question. No, you need to look for jobs, yeah.
All right.
So usually in your final year of residency, like programs, because all this goes into like the stats for the program, right? Like if KU said, oh, like 60% of our residents were out of job, like that's a big deal. So they provide a lot of resources for you for them to make sure you find a place, because it matters to them where you go, because it shows on their record. So that's why a lot of programs are good about like making sure you're sorted before you leave the program. Like I want to apply for fellowship, so they're going to do everything to try and push me to match, because it goes in their records, like how many matched and how many didn't get in, you know, so, and how many applied and how many didn't match. So all that is part of the same process.
Oh, well, at least that's reassuring.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Charles asks, are there centers to sit for the exams in Kenya? And if so, what are some of them?
Yeah, I mean, there's only one place you apply through. That's Prometric. I think I mentioned that. So once you register on Prometric and you have your eligibility period decided, you'll get a Prometric ID number, and then you use that ID number to apply on Prometric's website. And then once you go on their website, they will tell you which centers are available. And I think there's one in Kenya for sure in town, which I know one of my colleagues sat his exam there. So I know there's one for sure, but I think there's another one too by the UN, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So there might be two centers, but there's one for sure. So I'm not sure about availability, because I sat all of mine in the US, and it does not matter where you sit these exams, because it's all central and it's all one scoring system, and it's based off like a curve. So it really doesn't matter like where and how and when you sat it, as long as you sit it.
Oh, also, in relation to that, Maureen asks, how long would the step one result be valid for?
Yeah, that's so it's not so US is like different in many ways, right? So I think it's so what they do is like once you sit your first exam, and I think from Jan 2022 onwards, you can only sit them in that order of step one, step two, step three. Before you could sit your step twos before step one, but I think they're changing that because they realize a lot of IMGs would do this, and they feel like this is a better system to make sure everyone is like on the same page. Anyway, whatever their reasons. So once you sit your step one, you have 7 years to sit your other exams to be ECFMG certified. So that's step two, and then your OET and that whole process to like apply for residency. So you have, they're valid for 7 years. So let's say you sat your step one now, and like in 7 years you did not take it, you did not sit your step two, your step one results get negated and you have to sit step one again. But if you sit your step two and like you get ECFMD certified and everything is good, you started residency, cleared all your steps, then you don't need to think about them ever, because now you're certified. And that those results they won't make a difference how long ago you took them. So yeah, 7 years is kind of the timeline for validity for taking your next step. Yeah.
Okay. And for the exams, Ilhan asks you to explain more about the ECFMG, and also if one can do the IELTS exam instead of the OETs.
Sorry, what's the, like explain the ECFMG? Okay, so ECFMG, how I look at it is like, it's almost like your point of contact, like your first medical board, so to speak, for foreign grads. That's how I would look at it, only because they handle everything that you're going to be doing as an international grad. They kind of set guidelines for what exams and how IMGs can become eligible to match for residency. So all the information that you need if you ever have any question regarding a process, while you're preparing for your USMLEs or preparing for your residency or regarding your J1 visa, you send an email to ECFMG, because they're the ones who coordinate all of that. So it's going to be like your first resource to like troubleshoot any issues regarding like your application process for residency. And I think that's in short what ECFMG is. And even to get your USMLE ID number, you need to go through ECFMG. So it's like they kind of take you over, they own you in a way, as a foreign grad, and you go through them for everything. Like if anything happens, and like for example, if you're failing your residency for whatever reason, ECFMG is going to be the first to be notified, and then that's how the process goes.
So basically, they're your to-go person as you go through the whole process.
They're the primary people who like certify you as an IMG in the US. Yeah.
All right.
Dr. I see a question that Teresa has posted twice, so she must really be burning to get an answer.
Yeah.
With a non-medical degree, I know you had spoken about the prospects of getting sponsorship and the necessity of sitting USMLEs for non-clinical paths in the medical field. But she asks if it's possible to get into med school with a non-medical degree, and can she go straight to residency? Please speak a bit more about the non-traditional medical student. Sorry for interrupting, Tejal.
Okay, no, could you repeat that question for me?
So Teresa asks, with a non-medical degree, say statistics, how can I get into medical school? Also, can I go straight to residency?
Okay.
Please speak a bit more about the non-traditional, I think, non-clinical medical student.
Okay. So from what I understand from this question is, after doing like a non-medical degree, how would they get into medical school in the US? That's what I understand. And then how would they get it? Can they go straight into residency from a non-medical degree? Right, the answer is no. The only way to get into residency in the US, an accredited program like through ERAS, is having gone through step 1, step 2, and clearing, sorry, I think other questions are popping up, and clearing that process, what I just explained. You have, because your application needs to go through, you have to be ECFMG certified for you to be eligible to get into, to apply for the match. So you can't use a non-medical degree. You can't do med school in Kenya, come and do MPH here, and then apply for residency without going through this process. So that's not possible, unless it's like a non-accredited, and I have no idea about that. The other question is how to get into med school. So if you have, so the US system works in a way that you have to do an undergrad before doing med school anyway, right? So if you did a stats degree, you just need to sit the entrance exams for med school here, which I think are, I forget what they're called. Oh, it's like slipping my mind, but it's like a very popular exam that you sit like pre-med school. So you need to sit an exam and clear that. Yeah, thank you, MCATs. So you sit MCATs to apply for med school in the US. And even if you're a PhD in like, you know, in pharmacy or whatever, biomedical sciences, and you want to go into med school now, you need to do your MCATs first. That's just how it works. It's a very standardized process. So to get into med school, you sit your MCATs. To get into residency, you do your USMLEs. And I don't think, like, they don't change that at any point. Not from what I'm aware.
Okay, so I have a question, similar question from Esther and someone else who says, how easy is it to get permanent residency in the US afterwards?
Permanent residence, like a PR, like a green card? Is that the question?
Yeah, something of the sort.
Okay, so if you come on a J1 and you transition to area of need work for 3 years, right? Once you have made that transition, you are eligible to apply for green card. All right. So once you get on an H1B, on a J1 visa, you cannot. But once you finish your J1 visa, you're eligible to apply for a green card. And here's a big perk. It's like, I am an Indian citizen. So my waiting line, like, I was born in India. So it's based off like your place of birth, from what I'm aware. If you're born in India, the waiting time to get a green card can be up to 15 to 20 years. So it's like a huge long, yeah. So it's like, okay. But the thing is, they can't kick you out of the country as long as your stay is valid, but you won't get a green card. But there are ways around it. And there are ways, like, you know, if you're someone, you can apply through like an EB1 pathway or like an EB2, where you try to come across as like, you'll be of great benefit, or like research or whatever it is, and they try to like fasten your process. but generally speaking, that's the rule. Now for Kenyan born, the waiting time is a lot lesser. So I think it's like max 2 years. So because the volume is not high. So it's very, very, very possible for you to like get a green card if you're Kenyan born in like a reasonable time. Yeah.
Oh,
From
well.
what I know. Yeah.
Oh, it seems like most of us are lucky here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Tusi asks, what drove you to select Kansas and University of Kansas in Wichita?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So I think the two things I've been asked frequently is why Kansas and why MedPeds? I was fascinated by finding a program that was both medicine and peds, because when I was in school, I think I had to make a conscious choice between the two. And when I realized I could do both, I was like, oh, like cool, I can apply for both. And it's 1 year longer and you get certified in both internal medicine and peds. So this program offered that. That's one. And two, was because I knew some Kenyans who were in this program and they highly recommended it. And they said it was a good nurturing program. My first options was to stay in Boston, like at BU, because that's where I did my course, or like, get into like a Harvard hospital. It's like just an Ivy League, hospital. So I could not match. And that's just something we have to get used to. And, we come from a system where we're told, we're like cream de la cream, like and all that. But now you're like even more competition. It's like narrow and stiffer and it's just harder. And there's a pattern of people matching into residencies where they did their med school. So like Ivy Leagues tend to keep people who are from their own school. And I think that's fair in some respect. And if not, there's like, you have to battle past people who are like, so there's a choice in residency application. The first preference goes to US grads who are US citizens. Second preference is probably going to go to US citizens who graduated outside of the US. Third preference is probably going to be like non-US citizens, like people are not US citizens, but did their medical training in the US. And then there's like the green cards, like the same list of people. And then when all these finish is when like you come in as an IMG. And then even amongst IMG, they know people like from specific programs, like, maybe in Lebanon who are like American, like accredited. So they have like specific programs that are accredited by the American associations. So they give them preference before you. So even amongst the IMGs, you're like a very, very small number, and you're fighting against all these odds. So you have to be open to like where you go, where you match, and the priority is going to be what you're matching into over where you're going, at least for your residency. And I think for fellowship, you can hopefully build your CV and show them, like this is what you've done in the US. So coming like fresh off the boat, especially not having any US clinical experience, it's a tough road. And I kid you not, like it was very tough. Like there were many times I thought I wouldn't match, just because it's very, very exhausting and there's just like tons of things and the competition is very stiff. So that's a real challenge and we should all be aware of that.
All right, so I think I'll hand over to Nikita to take over from here.
All right, thanks, Tejal. Just again about residency from MJ. Is practicing after residency automatic or one has to apply?
Yeah, like I mentioned, you have to find a job. Like unless you're a US citizen, you can just come out of residency and build your own clinic. But as an IMG, you'll need to find a job, most likely. I've not heard of anyone pursuing other paths, yeah.
A question from Tusi. How long does it take on average to register with the ECFMG, pay for step 1, and receive a confirmation for my test date?
I would give it, just because of like how, like I was a very pushy student. So I was in the dean's office like all the time. So I got mine done in a month, but I know like it can take 2 to 3 months. I was just like, did you get the letter? Did you get the letter? Like call ECFMG, did you send the letter? Because I know things get lost in translation. So what I mean is get my USMLE ID number. So once you have your USMLE ID number, then it doesn't even matter. Like once the dean's office attests your transcripts and like your identity and sends it off, then it's like a breeze. Like then it's not hard at all. Then you just, once you have your ID number, you just go on Prometric site and you choose your date and you sit your exam. Like it's that simple. And you can do that like within 2 weeks if you want to. So your biggest limiting factor is getting that verification through the dean's office. And sometimes like even through like Chiromo and getting the whole transcript certified, that's not hard at all. Like I didn't have struggles with that. I would just go, you just pay via M-Pesa and like they just do it for you like right there and then. So that was like a 1-day job for me. For me, the biggest struggle was like having the dean's office like verify everything. Yeah.
All right. So
and the thing is, I had to do it twice because ECFMG has a counterpart. It's called EPIC. So if you're applying to Australia, you need to get the EPIC part sorted. It's like the same thing, but through EPIC. It's like a different part of ECFMG. So like the dean's office was like, can you just like stay out of our office now? Like, so yeah, I was too.
So you did it twice because
because I didn't know where I wanted to go, so I applied everywhere. Like I even sat my IELTS. Like I literally did everything. So yeah.
Nice. A question from Lucy again. What factors should I consider when selecting a residency program? And are there tools that I can use to narrow down my selection?
Yes, good question. So what would you do to narrow down your choice? So I think if you know someone at a program, I think that makes a big difference. Like I knew people here. When I came for my interview, I met people, I saw the program, and I felt like this is probably somewhere I'm gonna like fit in. The other thing is like the weather. Like when I was in Boston, it snowed 4 to 5 months in the year. So that's a fact. If you're not used to snow and if it's not something you can get used to, it's real because these struggles are going to be real. When you're getting late for like your 6 a.m. shift, the last thing you want to do is like shovel your snow at like 5 in the morning. So the other thing is like in like Wichita, we have zero traffic. So coming from like Kenya, where it took me like 3 hours to get on a rainy day from home to like university, this is like a 10-minute drive across the city. So all this, I don't know, like for me that's like wellness for me in residency, you know? So those things matter too. Family is a big deal. If I have no one in the US, so it didn't matter for me. But if you have people, having someone around at least like a 3-hour drive, I think helps because you can get pretty like alone and lonely, and just having someone to go to is going to be helpful. Now, in terms of like more academic things, I think, again, so there are 3 tiers of like applications. So there's the university programs, and then there is community university programs. And this is probably something I should have included in the slides. And then there are like pure community programs. So there's like 3 different levels of residency programs that you'll come across. So obviously like the ones that are the university programs, like are very hard to get into. And those are the tough ones, and you need good scores and great CV and hopefully be a US green card at the least. Like those are like factors that matter. The university community programs, which is where I am, is like a university program but set in a more community setting. So you do have like it's more clinically heavy, but it's still more structured than like a pure community program. And there is still some research and stuff happening. So I find this to be a great balance. And some other things you can consider while applying for residency is whether that place has a fellowship or not. Like where I am, there is no fellowships here. So it's going to be a little harder for me to match into a fellowship than someone who matches into a place where there is a fellowship. So like the university program for KU is the one in Kansas City. So the one in Kansas City is the official, like the highest university level program. And the University of Kansas Wichita is a community program. So it's like an outreach program, not an outreach, but like a community program. And they also have smaller community programs, like there's one in Lawrence and like such, and like Salina and such stuff. So every university may have like multiple like places where you can do residency, but the difference is one is like a high, like the top tier university level, and the others are like community level. Now the difference is not in like the reputation, because the reputation is still KU, but the difference is in like the experience. Like you probably have more research experience at KU Kansas City compared to Wichita. But in Wichita, you're probably going to have more hands-on clinical experience than you will in Kansas City. Because in Kansas City, they're going to be fellows who are going to be doing everything. But over here, you consult the consultants directly, and then you kind of like run through the audits yourself. While at Kansas City, the fellows will be doing that, because once you consult, you just hand off that thing. So that's the difference in like what kind of training do you want. And if you go into like a pure community level program, it's all clinical, hands-on. So like if there's something you can't like deal with at your community level, you just transfer out. So that's how the programs are kind of like arranged, or like how to think of them. Yeah.
All right. So do you want to go into, I'm just recapping from your answer to see if I got everything. Do you want to go into a more clinical specialty, or do you want to go towards the research end of medicine? Do you like the weather in the area? Do you have family around or friends that you can go to when you're feeling like
Yeah.
you need some support?
So I knew a couple of like Kenyans here before coming. So KU Wichita has a few Kenyans in the program and even in the faculty. So you guys can Google them. I mean, like Dr. Akidiva was like the first Kenyan to come in the program, and he was from Moi. So there's a huge Moi kind of presence here in Wichita. There are still a few UONs, like I'm one of them, and my current chief is one of them. She's called Cynthia Kibet. Like, so we have a few of us, and then there was like Job Mugire, who is like he was also from Moi. So we have like a few Kenyans who've been in the system, and I would say like 80% have been from like Moi, but at least they know how the things are and they're easier to talk to. And, like if you're troubleshooting any issues and you don't understand the system, then they help you with that. And obviously they feed you Sukuma Wiki. So like, then apart, yeah, I don't know. I think that's like having people around is good. And I want to personally match into cardiology. So probably like 50% research and 50 clinical. That's how I see myself.
So Barad, on the same train, says he might have missed this part of your presentation, but he asks, how realistic is it getting into a surgical postgrad program, specifically something like cardiothoracic surgery?
Yeah, the answer is you did miss it. So when I did talk about like a couple of, I can show the slide again.
Yeah, the one with the chart.
Yeah. So this is kind of like the chart showing success rates with like specific residency. So I think to get into cardiothoracic, you need to go through Gen Surge. So you can already see like the competition is pretty stiff anyway. So it's like, like 26% match into, but hey, I match into an 18%. So I'm just saying like, you could be the 18%, right? Like these are numbers, and we need to kind of be aware that it doesn't have to be all like negative. So people still apply for surgery residencies and fellowships and match. But like it's harder. It's definitely harder. If you compare it to like more medical specialties like pediatrics and medicine, like 60% is pretty decent. Like you feel more assured applying to it. And if you start looking into more like tough ones like vascular surgery, plastics, it starts going lower. So overall, and orthopedic especially is especially hard, like 15%. You know why? Because they earn the most. So that's just how it is. And like surgery residencies are hard to get into. But if you know someone, if you've done research work, if you have great scores, who knows? And I think if you want to give it a shot, you should. But it is harder for sure.
One more question from me, and then I'll hand over to Tijal. Yeah. Lucy asks, I know you had talked about the whole pass-fail USMLE step 1 thing, but he asks, the USMLE step 1 system is changing from a graded score to a binary pass or fail system. How does this affect my chances of matching into a residency program?
Yeah, again, I wish I could, like, I wish I was a program director and I could just like tell you how I'm going to look at the applications, but it's hard. And what it would mean is that the focus will shift on other parts of your CV, especially your step 2 scores and your US clinical experience, your letters of recommendations. That's what I think will happen, but I could be wrong. And maybe it'll just be, oh, like, we don't care. But it only makes sense that they will start looking into these other things more carefully. So that's, I don't know, in terms of like, how will it affect IMG's matching? IMGs like run 50%. Like you can see if like the match rates are 50%, and there's another table that shows, you know, what percentage of all like graduates are US and how many are IMGs, and close to like 30 to 50% of workforce in the US is IMGs. So it's not like it's going to disappear, because like they need us. Like we make a huge part of their workforce. But what's going to change is like what how can you make yourself more like lucrative? Like why would they want you over someone else? And I think it's better to focus onto what you can do than like, you know, like what's not in your hands. So that's how I look at it.
Okay, so with regards to that, Nicholas asks, are you allowed to work as a GP before you get matched into a residency program?
No, and I love that. And I really support that idea. I don't think anyone should be practicing medicine without a residency. And that's one of the reasons why like US was, it kind of tied in with how I think about medicine. Because coming fresh out of med school, I don't think we're ready to like practice medicine. So if you want to be a GP, you need to do family medicine residency. You can't just practice medicine. You can be like an MA, like a medical assistant, or like some other thing, or like do research work, but you cannot practice medicine until you've done residency in the US.
Okay, so I think we're about to wind up. So there are two questions from Amos. He asks, hi doc, about physiotherapy. Could you kindly talk about the best universities one can study in the USA and the possibility of securing a scholarship for specifically physiotherapy, and whether it's hard or easy to get into because physiotherapists work hand in hand with doctors?
Oh, I really, really wish I could help you here, Amos, but like I have zero idea about the physiotherapy process. But if I know the US system well enough, there's probably a completely different pathway, because I know a friend who's a pharmacist who has been trying to get into pharm school, or to get into pharmacy work here in the US. And for them, they need to go through pharm school in the US again. Like you can't just sit an exam and clear. So every course and every profession is very specific and different. So I don't know about physiotherapy.
Okay, so also, Nthus is also asking, are a certified transcript and a letter from the dean the only documents they need to register for the ICFMG and get the USMLE ID? Yeah.
Sorry, was it like what two documents did they mention?
A certified transcript and the letter from the dean.
So there's like a verification document that you'll get, and you know, honestly, these things change every year. So it'd be pretty premature for me to say like, yeah, these are the only three documents. But ECFMG's website, if you download the information booklet, will guide you through every single document that's needed to like register and get a PIN number. And it's literally like that page of like getting an ECFMG number is just like one page. So it's not even that long to like go through. But from what I'm aware of, they'll send documents which include like a verification, like an identity verification. So university verifies your identity. And then there's another one that with your like medical school degree. I'm not sure how it works when you're a med student. So it's probably like a good standing certificate or something like that. I'm not sure. But as a graduate, when I applied, it was my degree and my transcripts. And then once they verified that, they sent it to ECFMG and I got my number. And once you get your number, you use that to like apply for exams, and then the process I talked about.
Okay, and Esther asks, how long the residency programs range from?
Yeah. So again, depends which residency, right? So internal medicine and pediatrics are 3 years each, like they're both 3 years long. And then like internal medicine and pediatrics, a combined residency is 4 years. Most residencies are 3 years, most, but then like anesthesiology, I think is 4 years. Neurology is like 5 years because now you're doing, actually it's 4 years because you do like 1 year of internal and then you switch into neurology. And then gen surge is like um, 5 years. Orthopedic surgery is like 5 years. So surgical fields are longer, medical fields are shorter, but
Oh, just
yeah,
like here
pretty
as well.
similar. Yeah, pretty similar.
So Charles asks, between step 1 and 2, which one was more tasking for you? And generally, what would you say was the magic bullet? Was it revising through questions, reading through notes, or both?
I found step one hard, and because I did step one before step two, and because I was already a doctor, I found step two a lot easier because I had just done step one. So a lot of the knowledge is like you can extrapolate it, and then um, I already had that clinical experience. So step two was like I just prepared for 2 months, and a lot of people will not recommend that, but I felt comfortable doing it. So and I also did well in it. So step two overall was easier. Step one is hard because it's like I mentioned, is going back to stuff you did in first year of med school. So um, what worked for me there is like I think initially having like your first 3 months should be dedicated to like first kind of revisiting all these subjects that you did in first and second and third year, like reintroducing yourself, refamiliarizing, because it takes time to start thinking that way again. And then what worked for me was questions, a lot of questions, and then consolidating it with on first aid and then reading that at the end. um, I think because the questions that I don't know if we like the questions that we do here are like just to like that's a actually a step one question. So like that's a step one question, right? Like I think in med school, what we would be asked is, okay, like, where is the pouch of Douglas? But in this situation, you're given like a clinical scenario and you're asked, okay, where is the patient going to bleed? Like, so you really, it's more application and just rearranging your thoughts and like your knowledge to kind of integrating it in a clinical scenario is what's going to take some time. And once you're okay with identifying what they're asking in a clinical situation, then you get comfortable with answering these questions. So I think a lot of questions is the way to go. And even just the questions, it's more like the explanation you get after the questions is what changed how I thought about questions. So I would spend almost like 20 minutes on one question because I was going through the explanation in a very detailed fashion. So that's what worked for me. And like that's a step two question. Again, very clinical oriented. You get this whole medical history and how they come in, and it's very application oriented rather than like fact regurgitation.
Oh, yeah. Nobody wants to go back to their Krebs cycle after they're
Yeah.
done with med school.
Yeah.
So just as we close this program, Esther wants to give us a summary, basically how the step was from you, like finishing med school, when you did your step one, just how it went, a summary of the process you went through.
Sure. It's very, very similar to this. And sorry. So very similar to this, except that I didn't have OETs to schedule, and I had more challenges with setting a CS. So I finished med school in 2014 December, and like I was figuring life out for like 2 years. And when I decided the US, I decided to pursue a path of like first doing an MS in clinical research at Boston University. So I went there in August of 2017. And then that's when I'm like, okay, now I need to like sit for my steps. But mind you, I had everything else sorted. All my documentations were sorted until then. Like all the stuff that I needed from the dean's office was in my hand. So I knew like my application was going to be ready. So you have to like do that research early on so that when you're making this transition, like you're not you're not lacking documents, because a lot of my friends were, and they just said not available for their documents. And I think that makes a difference. So once I had all of that ready and I was set to go, I tried to read, like it's called Doctors in Training. It was like an online course-ish that helped me navigate first aid, because I would just look at first aid and I would be like, this is just a lot of information. So that helped me like run through first aid in like a more organized fashion. So some people use Kaplan, that's a good source as well. Some people use Boards and Beyond. So there are like several sources out there that can help. And if people are individually interested, they can email me and we can like figure that out. And there, like I said, like there's Dr. Chala's YouTube channel, which explains all of these options. So so I went through that, and then my first ever like mock score for my USMLE step 1 was like awful. It was like beyond a fail. So it like kind of woke me up, and I started working even harder. And I sat my step 1 in March, like I mentioned here. And then I scheduled my step 2 for June. And then in June itself, I had already applied for, back in March, I'd applied for a CS in July. And then I sat my CS in July. And then I started my application process in August. So meanwhile, again, in the middle, I was doing away rotations. I did observerships while I was in Boston with 2 attendings, one in nephrology, one in cardiology. Then I was working on research. The good thing was I was already in a research course, so I had some abstracts published and some presentations and conferences. So I had all that done. And these 2 people I did observerships with became my LOR writers. So I had 2 US letters. And then I reached out to Dr. Ilovi on like medicine side at UON. So I knew her well from med school. So she kind of co-signed a letter from the department head, and I got that uploaded. Then I asked like one of my ER physicians where I was working in Aga Khan to write me a letter. So I got all those letters sorted by like June-ish. I had them all uploaded by June, July. And then the other thing you'll need is like your personal statement. I didn't mention that because I mean, it's just something you'll have to do in like every application process. And the personal statement, even though I think the one thing I've heard consistently about personal statements is it's not good. It might not get you like a place, but it can hurt you. So if you write like a poor personal statement, it can work against you, because they'll be like what is he written here? Like if you try to put down another specialty or something like that, where something is obviously wrong, you're like, oh, I don't do surgery because they're like they have big egos or whatever it is. Like, so you stay away from putting down others, or you don't want to do medicine because all they do is talk, like, so, there's that whole fight between surgeons and internists. So you can't put down another specialty in any forum, and rightfully so, because every specialty has its strengths, right? So, and you want to kind of focus on the strengths of what you're applying for and why you want to do what you want to do, rather than why you don't want to do other specialties. Those are just a few tips. Yeah, but this overall is kind of like my process to applying for residency. And then I matched in March of 2019. And then once you match, then the program sends you all the requirements that you need to go through with the embassy and everything to get your J1 visa. And then, like I said, a bunch of trainings that you'll need to do. And then the first 3 months of residency are like really tough, but then it gets better.
Oh, wow. So just as we close, Natasha just wants to confirm, are both STEP exams MCQs?
Yeah, they're all MCQs except the last half day of the step 3, which I mentioned is a clinical case situation. So it's like on a software where it's more interactive, but all the step 1 is MCQs, step 2 is MCQs, and 1.5 days of step 3 is MCQs.
Okay, so thank you, Doc, for taking your time.
Sure, of course.
I'll hand over to Nikita, who will project for us before we do our vote of thanks and close for the day.
All right, thanks, Teja. And thank you very much, Dr. Rhythm. Just I have a very short presentation on the series, and then I'll hand over to Winnie to do the vote of thanks. So today we have had our fourth of 5 talks in a series on studying abroad for Kenyan students, Kenyan medical students specifically. So our first one was the Australian talk from Dr. Mora. Then we had the Canadian talk from Dr. Maugo. Yesterday we had a talk from Dr. Ritika. And today we've had our talk from Dr. Rhythm on studying in the States or working in the States as a Kenyan trained medical student. Why am I highlighting these past talks? It's because they're excuse me, it's because the recordings are available for all of them. So the resources are there. There are documents and PowerPoint presentations with more resources than what was available on the recordings from the Zoom sessions. So if you're interested, just reach out to anyone in the AMSUN committee or in the planning committee for this talk series. The next weekend, this coming weekend, we're going to have our final talk of the session, our final session of the talk series rather, on studying or working in South Africa. So this is just to appreciate our planning committee. Quite a number of medical students have come together to work behind the scenes to make this happen. So it's not a normal event. Just make sure that you take advantage of the sessions. Make sure that you watch the recordings if you haven't attended the previous ones. Make sure that you're available for the final talk this coming weekend. It's been a pleasure hosting you. My name is Nikita Musuri, and I will now hand over to Winnie to do the vote of thanks. Over to you, Winnie.
Hi, Nikita. Thank you so much. Actually, Esther will do the vote of thanks. Let me just... Esther, are you there?
Hi.
Hi, Esther. We can hear you.
Okay, I'm just gonna hold up my phone because I was also using my laptop and do this.
Okay.
I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rhythm, for attending the meeting. This was very informative and it gives us more hope. We've had a couple of talks. Some give us more hopes, others not so much. But it's good to be informed and know what options you have out there. I would also like to thank everyone for attending. I know the timing is a bit tricky, but you have to work around it because of the difference in time, and also the doctors are also a bit busy, so kindly bear with us on that. I would also want to thank Nikita and Tejal for the awesome moderation. It was very elaborate and you guys had really awesome coordination. That is really good. I would also want to urge everyone to use the information they're getting to maximum use. Like so many of the doctors have been telling us they wish they knew these things before. You know, like Dr. Rithim wasn't sure what he wanted to do for a while. He did Australia, USA. So, but we guys have the advantage of hearing about these things and learning. We also have the career talks for those who don't know what they want to do yet, which we'll go on with after we are done with this study abroad series. So just put that information to maximum use and tell a friend to tell a friend. Next Saturday at 6 to 7 p.m. we have a similar talk on South Africa. Tell your friends in advance, and we're bear with the time, by the way, because we are really trying, but you know, it is what it is. And I think 6 to 7 is not that bad. So kindly show up. And yeah, for today, this is it. I would like to officially close the meeting and thank you massively. Like you guys, thanks so much. Thank you, doctors, so much. I can't emphasize enough on that. And you're really awesome, by the way. You're doing like a double major.
No,
We're
thank
having
you.
a hard time doing all this. We're having a hard time doing all these minors and you're doing 2 majors. What?
No, thanks for having me. And
Big up. Yes, Doc?
I'm saying thank you for having me. I think it's a great effort, and I wish this is something we had in med school. So I think you're right. I think people should take advantage of your resources.
Thank you so much, and over to you, Nikita. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention the AMSUN team. My goodness. AMSUN has been like really behind this. They've really come up with great ideas, including these meetings we are having. So big up to you guys. Good job. And there's a lot of teamwork over there. I can't even explain. God bless you all and good night.
All right, so that's it for today. Feel free to log out. Thank you very much, Dr. Rhythm. Have a nice evening, everyone. If you have any further questions, ask them to anyone who you know in AMSUN and they'll be sent over to Dr. Rhythm.